Welcome to this video. In this video, I would like to show you over 15 nice and useful SAP GUI features in SAP ERP and SAP S for HANA. Enjoy the video and let's get started. If your SAP GUI looks like this and you see that another user is working with a different theme in SAP GUI, don't be scared. This is totally normal because in here we are seeing the so-called SAP Belief theme. And I personally, but that's my personal opinion, don't like this theme. I prefer the older version more, and you can easily change the theme in the SAP GUI options. So you can enter the SAP GUI options directly after you've logged in under more SAP GUI settings and actions and options. Or you can also access the SAP GUI options in the SAP logon. In the top left corner there you can click on this hamburger menu on this button, and then you can choose options. And under visual design and theme settings, there you can select your theme that you prefer and you like to work with most. If you click on the drop down, there you can select the theme that you like most. I personally prefer the SAP signature theme. I like it the most. If you would like to work with different themes, then you can just try them out, select it, and then you're good to go. So as mentioned, I would like to change it to the SAP signature theme. Then I click on apply and OK. And once I've logged in again in the SAP system, then you will see the outcome. So now, as mentioned, I have logged in again in the SAP theme, and now we can see the SAP signature theme. Now I would like to show you how you can select and copy a word or a sentence in SAP ERP and SAP S/4HANA. So to show you this, I open up a new transaction, the Miro. It's a transaction for posting incoming invoices. And in here we have different elements in the Theme Pro. For example, we have input fields, and here it's quite easy to select the value. We can just use Control A to select everything, Control C to copy it, and then Control V to paste it in. For example, if we have such an element, then we can move with our mouse over it to select the preferred input. But if we have such kind of inputs like this, the company code, then we can click wherever we want. We can't copy this input. So for example, to show you this, I open up Notepad. And here I would like to select and copy this value, the company code, and I paste it in here. So if I click on this element, you can see that it has this focus with the red corners, with the red frame, and then I can use Control C, and then under Control V, I still have the old input in my cache, so it's not copied. So how can I copy this value? There's a little tip. You can use the key combination Control Y. So once I've used this key combination, then my cursor changes to this dark cross, and then I can move over this input, and then I can use Control C to copy it. And now if I open up again the notepad, then you see that I have copied this value. If we are a ABAP developer, then there's a different trick that you can use to select a single word. So for this, we're jumping over to the ABAP editor, is the transaction SE38. Here I have an sample report. I go, for example, into change mode. And in here, if I would like to select a whole word, then I can use Control key on my keyboard, hold it, and then I can click, and then the whole word is selected. So for example, I can do it with here. I now have press the control key on my keyboard, I can do whatever I want, and then I can use Control C to copy it. If I'm not pressing and holding this key, then this happens, just jumping into different words. So now I would like to set the focus on the footer. In the footer, there are really useful information. In the bottom right corner, there you can open up the system information with this triangle. Once you've clicked on this triangle, then useful information show up. In here, you can change the shown information with this dark triangle. If you've clicked on this, then you see that now the system ID and the client is showing. You can change it, for example, if you click on the client, if you click on the user, if you click on the program, transaction, and so on, to show this kind of information in this footer in the bottom right area. So for example, I recommend to show the transaction code. So you can click on this transaction and then the transaction code is showing in the bottom right area. In the bottom left area, there success messages, warnings, and error messages are showing. So for example, as we've seen in the Miro, there a success message occurs. And for example, if I jump to the Miro once again, there in the bottom, there we can see that a success message shows up. If I double click or click one to this message, then I see the documentation of this message, and this is well documented, this is well written, that you directly see what you have to do. And especially for SAP beginners, I recommend to keep an eye on this bottom area because this is really useful. One of the most important input fields in the whole SAP system in SAP ERP and SAP S/4HANA is the command field or OK code field. You can reach the command field in the top left corner over here. If you don't see this command field, then maybe it is not visible. You can close the command field if you click on this button, and you can open the command field once again if you click on this button again. And maybe if it is still not showing, then you can activate the command field in the SAP GUI options. You can reach the SAP GUI options if you click on this button, Customize Local Layout, or you could use the key combination Alt and F12. And then you can click on options, or what you also can do is you can, under SAP logon in the top left corner, there you can click with your left mouse click, and then you can also use options. Under interaction design and visualization 1, there you see the settings for the OK code field. So in my case, the OK code field is showing. If you deselect it, then it is not showing. And in here you can set up if, for example, the OK code field should be shown also in the dialog box. So this should be activated to show up your OK code field or command field. If you click on apply and OK, then your command field is visible. And in the command field there, we have a lot of useful shortcuts and transaction codes that you can enter. I think one of the most important key combination is the key combination Control Shift and 7. If you're using this key combination, as you might have recognized, then I will directly set the focus into this command field and jump in there, and then I can jump, for example, to another transaction code. Once again, now this focus is in this input field. I'm using Control Shift and 7, and then I'm jumping into this command field. As you might have seen, there is another useful prefix that you should use in your daily work with the SAP system. It's the /n prefix. What does it do? So basically, if we're jumping in one step back to the SAP Easy Access menu, the Start menu, there you can enter transaction codes without any prefix. So for example, if I would like to go into the data browser and the transaction code SE16N, I can directly type in this transaction code without any prefix, and with enter, I directly reach this transaction. If I, for example, would like to jump to the Miro and I type in Miro, then this does not work. So in order to jump from one transaction to another, there you have to go one step back to the SAP Easy Access menu and then type in the transaction, in this case Miro. With the prefix /n, you don't need to go to the SAP Easy Access menu because indirectly the /n routes to the SAP Easy Access menu and then enters the transaction code. So for example, if I now would like to change to the data browser, the SE16N, then I can type in /n SE16N, and then I'm moving over to this transaction. Another very useful prefix is the prefix /o. What does this prefix do? So basically, this prefix open up a new window, a new mode. So for example, with this button, in the button bar, there you can open up a new GUI window, and then you're reaching the Start menu, the SAP Easy Access menu, and for example, there you can enter a transaction code. So with /o, you're doing exactly the same in one step. So for example, if I type in /o Miro, then the Miro is opened up in a new window. This is really useful. If you would like to debug the executed ABAP program, then you can use a little trick. You can use the shortcut /h in the command field. So for example, if I type in /h, then as in the status bar, I can see that the debugging is now switched on. So my next action is starting the ABAP debugger, and then I can analyze and see what kind of logic is executed. And this is quite useful if you would like to analyze the logic behind this graphical user interface. One shortcut that I highly recommend is the shortcut /NEX. So with this shortcut, basically the whole session is ended and you will log off from the SAP system without being asked. So for example, if as in my case, I have opened up multiple windows, multiple modes, and I can directly close these sessions and log off from the SAP system with this shortcut. If I use enter, then I'm logged off. At some point, a program is running long time, is maybe stuck in an infinity loop, or is loading a lot of data which is time consuming, and you can end and stop such running transactions in the top left corner if you click with your left mouse click, and then you can use stop transaction. And there you can stop a transaction, call the transaction once again, maybe with different selection criterias, or contact your SAP Basis department to figure out what happened. In my case, because now a transaction is running and takes some time, this won't work. But at some point, it's easier to stop a running transaction instead of just waiting when it is maybe finished or when it reaches or when it raises a short dump. There are two quite useful key combinations to open up a new window. So for example, you can open up a new window if you click on this button in the button bar. You GUI window, and then a new window will open up. You could also use the key combination Control plus on your keyboard to open up a new window, or Control N. What you also can do, as shown in a previous tip, you can use the prefix /O and a transaction code. So for example, the SE16N, and then you will also open up a new transaction in a different window. So now I would like to show you how you can execute transactions without having the needed authorizations. Yeah, this is kind of odd, but in some cases this will work, in some cases this won't work. It basically depends on the authorization settings and if it is handled in the ABAP program. So basically in this case I have created a set transaction called set_test. If I type in this transaction code in the command field and hit the enter key on my keyboard, there I can see in the status bar that I have not the authorizations to use this transaction. So basically what you should know is that behind a transaction code there is a program. So now we can find out this program and try to execute it in a transaction in the SA38. So basically there are two ways to find out the program, what is behind this transaction code, and we can first of all open up the transaction SE93, type in the executed transaction code, in our case set_test, and then click on display, and in here you can see what kind of ABAP program is behind this transaction code. There we can copy it because we need it later. The second way how you can identify the ABAP program is over the data browser. So we're opening up the SE16N and type in the table TSTC, hit enter, and in here once again I type in the transaction code setTest, hit the F8 key on my keyboard or use this online button, and there I can see on the program the executed program. Over here I also can copy it in my cache. And now we're jumping over to a different transaction, the SA38, and here you can enter the program name. Now we would like to execute it. You can click on this button or you could use the F8 key on your keyboard. And now what we can see that this has worked. We could execute this program without having the authorizations for the transaction code itself. What I highly recommend is to set up a start transaction. A start transaction will be started after you have logged in the SAP system. And this is really useful, especially if you're working a lot with one transaction and you don't have to enter the transaction code in the command field after you've logged in. You directly can start working. And for example, you also can switch from the start transaction to another while using the prefix /n. So this still works, but it makes you faster and it's easier to continue and start working with SAP system. You can set up a start transaction in the menu under extras and set start transaction, or you could also use the key combination Shift and F7. And here in this input field there you can enter the transaction code. So for example, the Miro. You can press the enter key on the keyboard or click on this button, and then as we see in the status bar, the transaction Miro is set up as a start transaction. For example, if you would like to change this, then again you can go to extras, set start transaction and change it, for example, to SE16N. Then you have changed the start transaction. Or for example, if you would like to delete a start transaction, then once again you can go to extras, set start transaction, delete it, and then take over your input. Now the definition of a start transaction has been reset. I highly recommend to use standard parameters in your daily work with the SAP system. So, for example, if you are working in one specific company code for one specific cost center, then you can set up star parameters, and this company code or this cost center will always be used. Of course, you can change the parameter afterwards in the process, that's sure, but this standard parameter will be set by default. And you can set up standard parameters in your user profile. You can enter the user profile by typing in the transaction SU3 in the command field. Or you could also go to System, User Profile, and then User Data. And there are the parameters. There you can set up a default parameter for your user. So, for example, here you can use the for help to search for a specific parameter. And once you've selected one, for example, this one, then you can set it with a specific value, save it, and then the standard parameter has been set. There's one easy way how you can identify and find out a standard parameter for your user. So basically, we would like to set up a company code. So for this, we're jumping over to Miro. And here we have a field for the company code. So in here we can press the F1 key on your keyboard, and then we are reaching this documentation of the company code, and in here with this button we can open up the technical information. Then we can see over here this parameter ID. In this case it is BUK. So normally you log in into the SAP system by double clicking on one connection, then typing in your SAP user and your password. You could also use a specific client and use a specific language that you want to. And if you hit the enter key on your keyboard, then you are logged in into the SAP system. And there is, in my opinion, one easier way that you can use to log in into the SAP system faster and better. In the button bar, there you can see a button generate shortcut. And if you click this button, then a pop-up shows up where you can set up a title, a type, transaction, system information, and your user information, and where you would like to save this shortcut. So basically, this title is important for your shortcut on your local computer. I leave it like this. Under the type, we have the possibility to switch between three different types: transaction, system command, and report. In our case, we would like to use transaction. And once you've double clicked on this generated shortcut, then in our case, a transaction will be executed. The session manager, because we have created the shortcut out of the SAP Easy Access menu. If you want to, you can also type in another transaction, for example, the Miro, or another transaction, SE16N, for example, and this entered transaction code will be executed once you have double clicked on your SAP GUI shortcut. Under system description, there you can select your system that you would like to use and that you would like to log in. And under client user language, there you can set up the client, the user, and the language. And you have to keep in mind that you can't change the client and the language afterwards in the SAP GUI shortcut. You can change the user if you want to, but if you would like to log in into different clients, into different languages, then you have to set up different SAP GUI shortcuts. Under location, there you have the possibility to set up the location where you would like to save your SAP GUI shortcut. And once you've clicked finish, then you have created and set up your SAP GUI shortcut. So now what we see that we have created one SAP GUI shortcut. And if I would double click, then as mentioned, then the transaction will be executed. And because I am still logged in into the SAP system, I will log off 1 second to show you a faster way to log in into the SAP system. And by double clicking on this SAP GUI shortcut, a pop-up occurs for the SAP GUI security, because now the program wants to access the SAP GUI, the SAP system, and here you have to allow this access. You can remember this decision, so in further execution, this pop-up won't occur. Now, this pop-up shows up, and there you can enter your username. As mentioned, you can change it to a different username. And here under password, there you can enter your password. And now what we can see is that for our case, we've set up the data browser, that now this transaction has been executed. You could also use a different transaction if you want to. You can set up a own color for your SAP system and your SAP GUI, especially if you're working with different SAP systems and different SAP clients. Then you can use different colors to directly see in which SAP system you're currently working. So for example, if you are working with a quality system and a productive system, then for example, you can set up the quality system to green and the productive system to red, that you directly see that now you're working in the productive system, and that you should be more aware of working with sensitive data. And under the SAP GUI options, you can change the color for your SAP system. Keep in mind that you have to be logged in and then access the SAP GUI options and not over the SAP logon. So under options, there under visual design and define custom colors or color settings, there you can just, for example, under define custom colors, define a custom SAP signature color, or under color settings, there you can set up the color for your whole theme. So for your whole SAP GUI in general, not depending on the SAP system you're logged in, but you can change the color as mentioned if you are logged in. So under customize local layout or the key combination Alt and F12, and then options, there you have more options, not just define custom colors and color settings. You can also access the function colors in system, and in the top there you can set up a color for your whole SAP system. So for example, you can set it up as green, you can set it up as purple, as red, and so on. And if you would like to, you can also set up the color for your client of the system. So for example, there, if you want to, you can set up the gold, green, purple, red, and so on. So in my case, to show you this now, I have the default color, so a blue color, and for this I would like to set it up as red. So I now click on apply and OK, and you see the changes after you have logged in the SAP system once again. So now I'm logging off and on again to the system. So and now you see that the color has changed from this blue color, the standard color, to this red color. If I would like to set up a favorites, then for example I can do this in the start menu in the favorites menu. Over there I can right click and then insert transaction, and there I can insert a transaction code that I would like to add as a favorite, for example the Miro. With enter I can take this over, and now I have set up the Miro as my favorite, and with double click I can execute this transaction and reach the Miro. There's one more easier way to add a favorite directly out of a transaction. So to do this, there you have to open up the transaction that you want to add as a favorite. So here I am now reaching the SE16N, the data browser, and now you can, if you want to, set up this transaction code as a favorite without adding it in the favorites folder. So to do this, we're going in the command field, and there we are using a shortcut, and this is %_ GCADDF. So once again, %_ GCADDF. And once I press the enter key on my keyboard, for now you don't see anything, but if we going one step back, there you see that this transaction code has been added to the favorites folder. Within the SAP Easy Access menu, you can also search for different transaction and transaction codes. So in here we see the default area menu S000, and in here you have different folders, for example Office, and in here you see different transactions, and if you double click then you can execute this transaction and move to this transaction. If you're not 100% familiar with the structure and this transaction, you can also search within this menu. To do this, you have to use a term in the command field, and this is search_SAP_menu. Once you have used this search term, then another pop-up will occur. Then there you can enter a search text, and for our case I would like to search for all the transactions that include ABAP in the search text. If I continue, there now I am seeing all the nodes and transactions that include ABAP in the search text. And this is quite useful. There you can just click on one transaction, use Ctrl+C to copy it, or you could also use Ctrl+Y to select one transaction code and copy it with Ctrl+C once again. If we're going one step back, and now we see that, for example, if I open one folder, then we're seeing at the beginning of a transaction the transaction code. And I highly recommend to activate this setting under extras and settings, or you could also use the key combination Shift and F9. There you can activate this checkbox display technical names, so that the transaction codes will be displayed in the tree structure in the nodes. And for example, if I deselect this, click on continue and now opening up, then we don't see the transaction code anymore. But if I under extras and settings activate this, then we see that this is now activated. And I think at the beginning by default this is not activated, so this should be the first task after you have logged in the SAP system, after your SAP user has been created. Then you should activate the setting, but this can be done once. You don't have to do this every time you have logged in the SAP system. This will be saved. It is also quite important that you display the keys of an input field and not just the description. What do I mean with this statement? So I would like to show and explain you this directly in a transaction in the MyGo. So for this, I opening up the MyGo. It's a transaction, for example, to post goods receipts to a purchase order. And in here we're seeing two drop downs. The first one is the transaction and the event drop down, and the second one is the reference document. So in this case, we're posting a goods receipt to a purchase order. And if we are clicking on this drop down, then we have multiple options. If we're clicking on this reference drop down, then we are seeing also multiple options and descriptions. And here we can see that we are just seeing the description and not the ID of this value that is being used in this case. So for this transaction, I think this is fine, but we have some transactions and use cases where we directly want to work with the ID, the value that is saved in the system, not just the description. And we can do this in the SAP GUI options. And for this, we are going to our SAP logon, and in the top left corner that we are going to options. And here under interaction design and visualization 1, under controls, we are seeing two options. The first one is to show the keys within the drop-down lists, and the second one is to sort the keys. And I highly recommend to activate both options, and with apply and OK, now the keys have been activated. If we're opening up again the MyGo, so I again open the MyGo again, and there we directly see the outcome. Now the value is being showing, in this case A01, and also for the purchase order. The history is very useful for input fields and in general for the whole SAP system. So for SAP ERP and SAP S/4HANA, you have two options to display the history for an input field. The first one is that you are using the space key on your keyboard. Now I have done this, and now we are seeing the three previously input the values for this input field. And the second option is that if you directly set the focus in an input field, that you are then seeing the history, and this depends on your settings. We will see in a couple of seconds. And this is really useful, especially if you're working a lot with the same data and you don't want to type in the data multiple times. Then you can use the history and then hover and click on one input. So for example, test, and then directly the value will be taken over and put into this input field. Before we're going in the settings for the history, I would like to show you one little trick where you can set up the history directly depending on the input field. And for that, we have to press the control key on our keyboard and then right click in this input field, and there we are seeing three options. We can enable the history specifically for this input field. We can disable the history just for this input field, or by default, we can use the default settings. And the default settings can be set up in the SAP GUI options. So once again, we are clicking in the top left corner, then options, and under local data and history, there we are seeing the options for the history. Under history status, there, as mentioned, we have two options to show the history. The first one, the on, is responsible for showing the history after you have pressed the space key on your keyboard. If you select immediately, then the history will be shown immediately after you have set the focus in this input field. If you select off, then the history won't be used in general for all the input fields in the SAP system. But for my case, I highly recommend to use the history. For expiry time in month, there you can set up the month after that your history should be expired. The maximum permitted file size in megabytes is a parameter that you can set up to figure out how large your file should be, and under maximum number of entries, there you can set up the maximum number of entries that should be shown in the history. Under enable history for fields up to characters, there you can set up the maximum number of characters that should be saved in the history for an input. With the button clear history, there you can clear your history, your file, that it is reset. And honestly, the three options on history settings can be left as they are. But for enable history for fields up to characters, normally it should be set to 59. This should be the default setting, and I recommend to set it up to 255 because this is the maximum number of characters for input fields in the SAP system. And if you, for example, type in a really large input in an input field that allows 100 characters, and you type in 100 characters, but in here you have set up 59, then the characters after the 59th character will be cut off and not saved in the history, and just the first 59 characters will be saved in the history. So you're losing some data for your history, and because of that you can set it up as 255, that you guarantee that all the characters will be saved in history and can be used. If you would like to make some changes, then with apply and OK, you have changed your settings for your history. But you don't have to delete the whole history. For example, if you would like to delete one specific entry in the history, and for this you can use a little trick. You can use the delete key on your keyboard to delete one specific entry in the history, and for that you have to open up the history as I have done, and then you have to hover over one entry that you would like to delete, for example the test, and then you have to press the delete key on your keyboard. I'm doing this right now, and now we see that this entry has been deleted. I can do this for this entry as well, and now we're seeing that we just have this entry in our history. And this is really useful, especially if we have seen that you maybe typed in a wrong input that you would like to delete, or for example in the logon in the logon screen, there you maybe have typed in your password in the SAP username input field, and then you would like to delete this history because there every time you're using the history your password in a clear text will be showing, and this is not recommended. So there you can erase and delete easily this value out of the history. So now I have shown and explained you 15 really useful SAP GUI features, and I'm quite sure that you have learned a lot, but now because there are two really important F keys and F help in the SAP system, I would like to give you one extra tip and one extra SAP GUI feature, because in my opinion they are so important and really useful. And I'm talking about the F1 key or F1 help and the 4 key or F4 help. and they are named as F1 help and F4 help because they can be executed with your F1 key on your keyboard and your F4 key on your keyboard. And to use this, you have to set the focus in one input field or on one element in the DIM Pro. And for example, for the F1 help there, you have to use the F1 key on your keyboard. And then the performance assistant will open up, and there you will see a nice description, for example, of this input field of this material number. And here in this bar, you have a lot of functions. You can use the application help. What I highly recommend is there you can jump to the technical information, and there you directly see, for example, what kind of structure is in use, what kind of parameter ID is being used, and so on. You can also directly reach the glossary. You can reach the SAP Help portal, or if you want to, you can print this documentation. Also, the F4 help is really useful in your daily work with SAP system. You can execute the F4 help by pressing the F4 key on your keyboard, and there you reach the F4 help, and here you have the ability to search with different criterias for the material number, so that you don't have to enter the direct material ID by heart. You can directly search for the material number with different tabs, and here you see a lot of possibility, a lot of search functions that you can use. And after you have clicked the start search, then the search will be executed, and with double click there you can take over one value, so that you don't have to type in this value manually, that you can use it really easily and search for a value with the F4 help. You see that the F4 help is available with this icon, with loop icon on the right side of an input field. So instead, by clicking the F4 key, you can also click on this button, and there the same pop-up, the same window will open up, and you can use the same F4 search for your search. Thanks for watching. Now you have seen 15+1 SAP GUI features. I'm quite sure that they are really useful in your daily work with the SAP system, with SAP ERP and SAP S for HANA. You can also support me by liking this video, adding a comment, and subscribe for free. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.